Welcome back, fellow Britons, to the greatest show not on Earth, but in Westminster, where the clowns wear suits, the acrobats juggle statistics, and the ringmaster can't quite remember whether he promised reform or just a strongly worded consultation document. Yes, once again we find ourselves watching the spectacular three-ring farce of British politics, this time starring social care reform and welfare cuts for disabled people.
I think, like most people, I've long thought we ought to reform it, which is why we've asked Louise Casey to carry out that reform programme and to do it on a cross-party basis. She starts her work this month. I have expressly asked her to try to reach out straight away on a cross-party basis, because we need to reform social care. We need to make sure that if we do reform it, it's lasting reform. I don't think that that's possible unless it's a cross-party consensus about how we go forward with social care. It is hugely important, as I say, in its own right, and to complement what we do with the NHS. Very hard to get the NHS back working as we want if we don't also sort out social care.
Very true. Do you see social care as mainly a drain on the Treasury or as an enabler to the economy?
An enabler to the economy. My sister's a care worker, by the way, so I know this firsthand. I mean, absolutely. It's about ensuring that people can live to their full potential for as long as possible in their lives and have fulfilled lives.
Well, I'm pleased to hear you say that, but then do you share my frustration that much of the sector feels as well, that 3 years, which then butts up any decision close to an election. Now, when we've had social care reforms be kiboshed in the past, it has been during election campaigns. Surely the way to solve this would be to get this done and dusted during this Parliament, not kick it into the long grass, so that it can then be kiboshed at the next election.
Yeah.
Nothing says compassionate governance quite like slicing away support from the most vulnerable while simultaneously commissioning a 4-year think piece to explain why the system's broken in the first place. Let's begin with the dazzling warm-up act, social care, that ever so important service that helps our elderly, disabled and chronically ill citizens live with some sense of dignity. And what's the government done about it? Appointed Dame Louise Casey to write a report. Not just one report, mind you, 2, one for 2026 and another for 2028. Because apparently when someone's drowning, the best approach is to organise a PowerPoint presentation about moisture. Meanwhile, we're told that this reform needs to be cross-party, because of course agreeing on how not to bankrupt grandma requires a consensus between people who can't even agree on what day it is. And because this is Britain, we're now sat around waiting patiently while the Prime Minister assures us that change is coming. Eventually. Maybe. After tea.
I mean, firstly, I understand your frustration that this has been pushed down the road too many times. The way I see it is this. One, we need to take time to get it right, and it needs to be cross-party. And Louise Casey is, in my view, the right person on a project like this. I've got huge experience working with Louise Casey. But that shouldn't stop us doing things straight away, to answer your question, which is why we made available £3.7 billion of additional funding for social care authorities in 25-26. That is really important as a sort of first step, and obviously took steps in relation to carers allowance, weekly earnings limit, a fair pay agreement for social for adult social care, hugely important. All the analysis shows that we haven't got a sufficient workforce. It's a fragmented workforce, and that most people leaving social care are leaving social care to go to the NHS because they can get onto an integrated framework for progression, which they don't have. So I think all of those things can be done before we even get to the bigger question. So I don't think we should rush the work that Louise Casey is doing. I think that's the right timetable, but I accept your challenge that what we can't do is to sit back until she gets to that part of her report and do nothing in the interim. And I think that the money we've put in, the fair pay agreements and other measures are really important. I should also say that it's among the reasons I commissioned Louise to report in 2 stages, one in 2026 and then later in 2028. And we can get the 2026 recommendations and start acting on them before we get to 2028. So I don't agree with you totally that we should just go sort of both feet in with all the reform right now. We need time on that, but I do accept the thrust of your challenge, which is we do need to do things now, and that's why we're doing what we are doing in the interim.
3.7 billion thrown at social care authorities, which sounds impressive until you realise it's just enough to cover some sticky plasters and perhaps a new kettle in the staff room. Because let's not forget, the care sector is an enabler of the economy. That's the actual phrase used. Not essential, not undervalued heroes, but an enabler. Sounds more like a dodgy mate at a student party than a pillar of civilized society. And while we wait for this glorious vision of future reform to be written in biro and buried under parliamentary red tape, people across the country are being left to sort care for loved ones using a combination of charity, guesswork, and a deeply suspicious wheelie chair. But hang on, folks, the real headline act is just starting. Roll up, for the government's exciting new proposal to reform disability welfare.
Sarah Owen, MP. Prime Minister, I noted in your response to Ms Abrahams earlier the first question around wanting more disabled people to be able to work, and I think that's something that we all would like to see, that employers actually make the reasonable adjustments for people to access work. However, there are a group of people which the government's own assessments show that they are the most severely disabled group. These are people with limited capability for work-related activity. And for the future ones of those, there will be £3,000 worse off. This isn't a small group of people, this is potentially 730,000 people. So I want to ask you right now about how people are feeling about this. It's not often something we talk about in politics, but I think it is important because it's fair to say that your proposed changes to welfare reform have caused quite a bit of stress, I think, particularly among people with disabilities and their families. I'm sure many members have had similar things, but just some samples of what's come into my inbox. I am beyond stressed with anticipation of losing money. I have £700 to live on this month. Another one, the proposed cuts to disability benefits have left me feeling full of panic about the future and extremely let down. And the last one, I feel so sick, physically sick. The whole process is horrid. Please represent me. Prime Minister, what would you say to them?
Or as to reform disability welfare. Or as they like to call it, encouraging more disabled people into work. Which sounds noble until you realise the fine print basically says, get back to work or we'll take your money. Because apparently nothing inspires productivity like anxiety, stress, and the looming threat of eviction. Turns out around 730,000 people are set to be affected. These are people the government itself recognises as having limited capability for work-related activity. That's polite Whitehall speak for they're very disabled. And what are we giving them? Less money. Because obviously if you can't move your legs, the real issue is you haven't been financially nudged hard enough.
Well, I think this question of how people feel and values is really important. And that's why sort of standing back from the technicalities of any changes, the guiding principles are really important, which is those people that do need support and protection should get support and protection. Those that want to bridge into work should be supported by the government to bridge into work. At the moment, my own analysis is that pretty well all of the rules make it harder for people to get into work, not easier for them to get into work. But equally, those that can work should work. And we need to just apply those principles to the work that we are doing as we go along.
Prime Minister, my question was specifically about the people that are very unlikely to ever be able to work, the most severely disabled, of which in future there will be £3,000 worse off. And I just wanted to ask how you're working with the disabilities charities and organisations for which none of them that I can see have welcomed these plans. And I just wondered, I know that we're going through a consultation period.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask whether this is a consultation period on the policy itself or the impact of this policy, because I think that is very different. Will this consultation period actually alter or be able to change or perhaps bring people together on this in a way that we haven't been so far?
Well, I do want to bring people together on this, and it's very important we take different views into account. It's also important for people who have disabilities, which means they can never work, that they're not constantly reassessed, because certainly that's something I've picked up as a constant cause of anxiety, and that's why I personally think we should be doing more protection, a premium for those that are in the most severe category and never going to be able to work, and also relieve them of the pressure of being reassessed when we know that the reassessment isn't going to make any material difference. So I do think there are things that we can do that will reform the system for the better, and certainly we need to take views into account in relation to that.
Okay, and we all agree that we do want to see people and more people into work.
And our leaders continue to reassure us that they care deeply, just not enough to act quickly or consult properly or fund anything with actual ambition. Meanwhile, Britain's disabled citizens and carers are left with uncertainty, fear, and increasingly surreal letters from the DWP. It's government by ghostlight, just bright enough to see the outlines of a plan, never quite enough to know if anyone's steering the ship. Thanks for watching.